Welcome to the Mirror Media Podcast with Mukunda Raghavan.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Mirror Media Podcast. This is Mukunda Raghavan, and I have today Professor Satyan Sharma, who's a professor of Sanskrit, I believe at University of Chandigarh. Is that correct? Oh, froze up a little bit there.
Actually, yeah.
Sorry, what'd you say?
Assistant professor.
Assistant
guest
professor.
Faculty at the Panjab University.
At the Panjab University in Chandigarh, correct?
Yeah. In Chandigarh,
yeah. So Professor Sharma has been basically really active on Twitter for the past year and change, where he has talked quite a bit about not only general Advaita Vedanta and the traditions around that and so on, but he's also spent quite a bit of time really educating the public on the Dharmshastras tradition from the traditional perspective itself. And so, Dr. Sharma, welcome to the program. It's a pleasure to have you.
Thank you for having me.
So, Dr. Sharma, if you don't mind, what's your background? Like, where are you from? What got you into studying this, and how did you start the process?
So, I am born and brought up in Chandigarh itself. My father is from Punjab, and mother is from Delhi. So both are from Punjabi backgrounds, but quite a lot of difference.
Yeah.
We don't have a certain tradition of studying Sanskrit in our family for a few generations, I guess. Mainly, my father was a Punjabi scholar. He passed away in 2015.
Sorry to hear.
Yeah. So he got me interested into the languages side. We used to discuss when I started learning formally. I started learning Punjabi formally from him. So he started discussing the origins of words, and most of the words were going back to Sanskrit. So that caught my interest. Okay, now I have to see that language where the words are originating.
Right.
But slowly, after I didn't get any opportunity to study Sanskrit at school level. It was only when I once went to Haridwar, basically, for the last rites of my Dadi. And I got a book called Charon Vedon Ka Sar, some similar title. And I loved the language structure and the words. That was the love at first sight kind of thing. So even after that, it took some years when I finally told my dad that I want to study Sanskrit formally.
Right.
But again, no academic option was there to study at school. So I took some classes, private classes from Santosh Shastriji, who was a teacher at a government school in Chandigarh itself. But I had to stop the classes to pursue my commerce stream for +1 and +2 standards. Yeah. After that, in the BA, I happened to take Sanskrit. I was studying in another class, another subject, and one teacher, very weak and thin, she was getting treated for a cancer at that point of time. Swargiya Saroj Bhanotji, my first academic guru in Sanskrit. So she asked students if anybody wants to take Sanskrit, and I was like, I want to take Sanskrit. Yeah. So that was the first time I formally started studying Sanskrit in an academic setup. And ever since, I'm into it. And slowly after BA, I once dwindled into civil services, then came back, started MA, again dwindled back to some other stream, and then came back. And here I am. After my PhD, I'm teaching also at the university. Been lucky enough to get the opportunity. So mainly I'm teaching the Darshan Shastra. That is my main forte. And any other responsibility that the department gives me, I try to fulfill it.
So did you get your PhD also at Panjab University?
Yes.
So your entire career has been basically in Panjab University?
Yes, revolving around it.
Yeah. Excellent. So how long have you been teaching then?
I have been teaching here since 2018.
Okay.
As a research scholar, I was given the opportunity, and since then I've been teaching here.
That's excellent. Do you find that Sanskrit is now like a subject people are trying to take more of, or is it very few people in trying to take this?
Depends. Basically, in the Punjab region, the situation of Sanskrit is very bad. Very bad, actually. Most of our students at the university come from Haryana and Himachal.
Huh.
Mostly. Because there you have Sanskrit at schools and in colleges. Here we have in colleges and at university level, but if mostly, like my case is one of the rarest cases, but mostly people who study at school level, they take up at the bachelor's or college level and then the university level. So there is demand, but the passion is less. And in this region, Chandigarh, Punjab region, we have very less students, the regional students who are taking up Sanskrit.
Right.
Very less.
Interesting. I for some reason, I would have thought with all the cultural churn happening in India right now, Sanskrit would have been like pushed more and more.
Maybe it is being pushed, or at least people are trying to promote it, that at least people should get into it. And like my academic in charge of my department at the university, Professor Alankar, he has started some certificate courses and diploma courses for people outside of the academic circles, and they can come and study Sanskrit. And it's up to them if they get interested into it, and then they want to pursue it properly academically.
Okay.
So that the efforts are being made, but we still have to do some groundwork at the school levels, which in Chandigarh is not that good. Right? The opportunities to study Sanskrit at school properly, and most schools don't give Sanskrit. Most schools give Punjabi as an option from 6th to 8th and then forward. So at least in my region, there is very less opportunity to study Sanskrit.
Wow. I mean, that's I mean that's tough. Because I imagine like there were, Punjab used to have so many. The history of Sanskrit in Punjab region is
Yes,
pretty
very bright and very rich.
And so I mean, I don't want to get into the politics of it, so we'll leave that aside. Because I'm sure there's so much to talk about there.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So in the Darshana tradition, you said earlier when we were talking, you're really focused on Advaita Vedanta. So what areas in Advaita Vedanta were interesting to you?
Firstly, the philosophical side. Mainly the theory or the idea of three avasthas: the waking state, the dreaming state, and the dreamless state. It caught my attention because it was questioning the very basis of my existence and the existence of the world. Because all this, which we call the fundamental reality or reality, is compressed in this waking state only. So when I read about it for the first time, it shook me for a while.
Yeah.
But then I got interested in it because inside me, I'm very curious, and I don't shy away from questioning the very basis of things.
Sure.
So that is what interested. And then the Advaita Vedanta tradition, the way it approaches logical refutations and logical argumentation.
Right.
That interested me a lot.
Right. So I mean, on Advaita side, what I always find interesting is a couple of things. I think number one, its theory of most other traditions in the Indian schools of thought are Satkaryavada, right? So then you have Advaita Vedanta is very uniquely comes out with the Vivartavada, right? In some sense of the nature of the world.
Yep.
And a lot of times people don't understand that concept of Vivartavada or Satkaryavada. Would you spend, whatever time you can, just to kind of demarcate the two?
Yeah, basically the Satkaryavada is the theory that specifically, mostly we think that it specifically belongs to the Sankhya tradition, which says that an object which is a karya means an effect or an object which is born or which is made, which has an origination, is actually not born, but it is actually transformation of the previous of something which was in a previous state and the state changed. Like the seed changes itself into a plant or a tree or whatever. So it is in response to the Nyaya Vaisheshik theory of Asatkaryavada, where they say that the thing is born, it did not exist before, and then it started to exist.
Mhm.
So Asatkarya means the karya which was priorly asat or not existent,
Right.
and then it started to exist. Now the Vivarta theory rides on both, I guess, because it is like things are not actually born, or they don't actually cease to exist, because everything is a Vivarta. Vivarta basically means that it is an illusory transformation, not
Right.
actually a transformation. Like the Sankhyas believe in the transformation theory,
Yeah.
Parinamavada, that the things change, which is the basis of Satkaryavada. And Vivartavada is basically an illusory transformation.
Well,
It is not
apparent, right?
apparent transformation or illusory transformation. Illusory in the sense because it is not the actual truth that you're looking for. It may point towards it, but it is not actual truth. So we have this a division of Pratibhasik and Vyavaharik and the Paramarthik.
Mhm.
So most of our logical mindset and the system of pramanas and prameyas happens in the Vyavaharik part. The Pratibhasik is the illusory, and then there is Paramarthik, which is the ultimate reality,
Right.
fundamental reality, which underpins everything else, both the Pratibhasik and the Vyavaharik. So regarding the Vivartavada, we can say that it is the basis of the saying which is like Brahma Satyam Jagan Mithya. It's very popular
Yeah.
saying
Yeah.
of it comes elsewhere also. I've heard, but mostly it is from Adi Shankaracharya, and it tells you what Satya is intended in that statement. The Satya is the Paramarthik Satya which is intended. The world does appear, the appearance is real, but the apparent is not real, basically. The appearance cannot be denied. It is existing. You feel it. Say that it is actual in a sense that the things are being born and they cease to exist.
Right.
Fundamentally. Yeah.
Right. So the change itself that occurs is just something you experience. It doesn't actually occur within the object itself. So the change, in some sense, belongs in your own mind, not necessarily in
Not necessarily mind, but somewhere.
Yeah,
Because
somewhere.
mind itself is a Vivarta. It's
Yeah, I mean,
in this whole scheme. Yeah.
right, because it happens within the Mahat, right? And then the Mahat itself is part of the Vyavaharik. But yeah, but this is where the difference between the schools of thought on whether it's the avidya exists within the Brahman or the Jiva or
Yeah, that is a whole lot of a debate.
yeah,
Even the Advaita Vedantins
the
debate on
Bhamati
that.
school. Yeah. It's very interesting. I mean, the development of the thought is fascinating to me, just because I think, within the Madhvas and the Ramanuja schools call all Shankaras Prachanda Bodha, right? In many of the writings, and there is some like correlation you find between the thought processes. I'm not necessarily saying Advaita Vedanta is any form of Buddhism, whether it's Yogacara or Madhyamika or whatever, but there's some. I mean, I think that the world of Indian philosophy, like any other philosophical world, was so like intertwined. They took ideas from each other, whether it's the Nyayikas in relation to, Navya comes as a response to much of this, the Buddha schools and the Advaitin schools and so on. So I do think it's fascinating, the intellectual development of the thought. And although Samkhya was way back in the day, and people don't really talk about Samkhya much anymore, at least in a philosophical separate school. It is the foundation of much of the non Vedic, I mean non-Vivartavada schools. I mean, so I guess so you were focusing on Advaita Vedanta, but you told me you're doing a PhD on a particular text. Can you talk about the text you work?
Yeah,
I think it's very interesting.
Yeah. So most of the people do not recognize this text because it was last published in 1917 by Mr. T.M. Tripathi from a single existing manuscript or single available manuscript, if we can say, which was kept in a Jain Granth Bhandar in Gujarat. So I got hold of this text, and the name was striking because most of the people know this text, know the name of the text, which is Tarka Samgraha, as a text on Vaishesik philosophy, which professes it, which was authored by Annam Bhatt. The Vaishesik text was authored by Annam Bhatt, and belongs to the 16th, 17th centuries. So I, by chance, came to this text while surfing. I used to randomly surf Sanskrit texts.
Right.
I don't know why. So it came in front of me.
Because you're a Sanskrit professor. That's why.
I don't know, like whatever. So it had no commentary, no translation, and I was like, I want to take this up for my PhD.
Wow.
Because it is not easy. So that's
right.
Yeah. So I started.
So what century was this text from?
It is usually told to be 13th and between 13th and 14th century CE. But in my last chapter of my thesis, I've revised the date from 12th to 13th. I've moved a century behind.
Okay.
For like there's a lot of analysis that I put into it. So it seems that it is earlier than that, and maybe earlier further. So the striking part was of the text that two similar texts have been known doing the same thing, that is refuting the Nyaya and Vaisheshik philosophies. One is Khandana Khanda Khadya of Sriharsha, very popular, and the other is Tattva Pradipika or Pratyak Tattva Pradipika of Chit Sukh Muni. So both these texts, I had them with me. So I looked at them, and then I looked at this text. The difference with the Tarka Samgraha, which I took, was that Tarka Samgraha actually refuted Vaisheshik philosophy from the start to the end.
That's what it focused on.
All the categories, all the subcategories, everything. The Tattva Pradipika and Khandana Khanda Khadya only took main categories or the issues which they felt are more important to be refuted. It was not a complete refutation of the Vaisheshik philosophy. So I took it, and the interesting part is that in the refutation, the author, who is Anandagiri or Anandagiri, who has written a lot of commentaries on Adi Shankaracharya's works, he says repeatedly that these things are refuted only on the paramarthic plane, on the paramarthic level. On Vyavaharik level, all fine. We have no disputes. Okay. So in a sense, he has both assimilated it, that I agree that there may be such things as you are speaking of them, but they do not exist as such on the paramarthic level, which you think they do. Because the Nyaya and Vaisheshik say that these things exist fundamentally. The Paramanus exist. They conjoin and disjoin and whatever. So he says, Anandagiri says that I have no dispute, but these are not paramarthic. And at the end of the text, he summarizes all the theory, all the refutation, and says that in a similar manner, he can refute, or anybody can refute, the Sankhya theory and the other all other schools, all the darshanas, which is basically taking the lakshanas, the definitions on which the theories are based. For example, if I say dravya, what is a dravya? It is that which possesses a guna or a quality or an attribute. You take the definition and you start refuting it one by one. You start refuting the components, and it is done very beautifully. It motivates, or it impels your intellect to think more when you study these texts or refutation. And at the end of that, he summarized his own position of Advaita Vedanta, where he talks of the akaras or the forms of agyan or ajnan which work for all avasthas. Like there is one Jagrat avastha, there is a certain ajnan akar. There is one ajnan which governs everything, but there are different forms of that which govern different states. So when you wake up from a swapna or a dreaming experience, that akar ceases to exist and the waking akar begins. Then you again sleep, the waking akar settles down and the swapna akar, the akar of ajnan, rises again. So in this manner, it is basically akaras happening. One akar governs one state, another akar governs another state. But ultimately, agyan is one. There is one agyan. And once you get a hold of your own swarup, which is obviously for Advaita Vedanta, is Brahma itself, the agyan slowly gets destroyed. Now, someone may ask, as my students also asked one day, that see, Adi Shankaracharya attained mukti, they say.
Yeah.
So the agyan is still here. So if agyan is one, so how did it not, like, did he attain mukti or not? Because if he attained mukti, the agyan has to be destroyed.
Right.
So the answer to that is the temporal structures that we think in, before, after, now, and then, these structures exist within agyan. So actually we have no idea when the things are happening on the level of paramartha or the mukti. So I can take a pass on that, saying that, see, you cannot say that it happened before or now. It may have happened, but the temporal structures are only in the Jagrat Avastha and the Swapna Avastha, in the realm of Ajnana. Now let's see what happens to us when we somehow reach that stage.
No, so that's always, so I was just going to say that the temporality of these questions are always tricky because we're always stuck in the temporal nature of the world, right? Before, in, after. So when you talk about something that's released of time, then how do you conceive of that, right? Like that time period that it was bound, it doesn't go away. It's part, because this thing is so boundless. It's almost like it can at multi levels be free and still bound, because its deeper self is free while its phenomenal self is merely experiencing things in a bounded state. But kind of it's mind bending in many ways.
What I think of this is, I've been teaching Sankhya also, Nyaya Vaisheshika also, Advaita Vedanta also. All these Darshana Shastra schools aim at providing you mukti or salvation or liberation, I should say. Liberation from this bondage of birth and death and whatever. How they do it is interesting. They say that if you get the knowledge of the tattva or the fundamental truth, once you touch that, everything else automatically, you realize that it is not a permanent setup. It'll get destroyed and you are higher than this. And then you'll vimuktascha vimuchyate, the very popular saying that you are not actually bound. The idea of bondage itself is an illusion, because the swarup or the swabhav of yourself cannot leave. By swarup itself, by your nature, you are free. So the bondage is an illusion. And similarly, the idea of mukti is also fundamentally an illusion. But the processes by which they tell you this or they teach you this is interesting. Once again, I've been teaching, so students ask me certain questions and I might use them in this podcast also. So the question was, Tattva Gyan, for example, in the Nyaya Vaisheshika tradition, they say you attain Tattva Gyan of these categories, the 16 categories of the Nyaya Sutras, the Nyaya Shastra, and you shall attain liberation after that. Now, what the Tattva Gyan would be cannot be said. You have the definitions, you have the concepts. What the interesting part is, at the point where they explain mukti, they talk about vairagya.
Yeah.
So after knowledge, after the tattva gyan, you have a stage called vairagya, where you do not feel attached to any of the things that you have learned about.
Right.
After vairagya, there is the process of mukti. It starts. Now, why vairagya comes in? The question is, if like I get to know of things, we usually get bored after knowing a thing. Now I need something else. I need to know it. But when we talk of these categories are like Dravya, Atma, Brahma, Kal, Disha, these are all categories which are talked about in various Shastras. Prakriti, Moola Prakriti, Vikar, and all these things. After a point, basically, when you study one Acharya, then you study another Acharya on the same thing, and then you study another Acharya because you want to complete, you are curious about it. At one point, you give up. Like I do most of the times. I
Yeah.
study and then I'm like, I cannot say anything about this right now.
Right.
I cannot engage in it anymore because it is too confusing, because this Acharya is saying it this way, this Acharya is saying it this way. Either I'm not understanding it, which is most likely the case. Now there ensues Vairagya at this point of time. At this point of time, the Vairagya ensues, and that is what Vyasa, the commentator on the Yoga Sutra, calls the Parakashta, or the highest level of knowledge. He says, Jnanasya Parakashta Vairagyam. When you reach that Gyan, the highest form, the highest level of Gyan, the immediate thing that comes next is Vairagya, the detachment. Because once you know the things, you will automatically be detached from them. That's what they say. And Vairagya cannot come without Dukha. You have to experience some pain, some discomfort. Now, what this discomfort is, I can say that when you study these Shastras continuously for a while, and you start thinking about things in that sense, you start to feel that discomfort arriving, because your curiosity is rising and the answers are not coming.
Right.
And there is this world that you are caught in, and the mundane things that are happening around you.
Yeah.
And now you're caught in and you feel caught, like you are encaged into something.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now that feeling of imprisonment, because the things you were finding pleasure with in the past, now you are thinking that these are bondages. Now you want to leave them. And here the journey starts, the journey which is within.
Yeah.
The Shastras are outside, are in the outer world. The words, the terms, the concepts are all outside in
Right.
the books, or in the Upadeshas of your Guru. Now, when everything fails to satisfy you, even I could even say that sometimes the Upadeshas, even the Upadeshas, like they leave one atom below your satisfaction level. And then you are like, what I can do now? The Guru says, look within there.
Yeah.
Moolam anvichya.
Which is very interesting, right? This is, I mean, I find this to be a general sentiment, like for within, say, even the Vaishnavite schools, right, or the Madhva, Ramanuja, whatever. There's a point where there's either Sharanagati of sorts or Prapatti of sorts, and
Yeah.
I know they say these are the highest goals, but I also think it's because every other path leads to the same place you're leading to, which is the sense of utter entrapment, utter like bondage of either your mental states, because this is what happens when you study things so deeply. You want the answers clear, but clarity can't come in concepts, right? This is the same thing that happens, I think, in the Upanishad saying, Anavacha nivartante aprape manasasaha, right? There are the limitations
Absolutely.
of our language. Number one, limitation language functionally limits how we can think about a thing.
Language is temporal.
Yeah. So which is why the experience, the anubhava, is so vital for any sense of like I guess truth, because like truth isn't a cognition. I mean, although the Nyayas will say truth is a cognition of the tattva as it is, but I think that's a cognitive, linguistic kind of understanding, where I don't think it's necessarily that this, like, Shankara talks about this as an intuitive understanding of the nature of Brahman, not the linguistic necessary understanding. And this is where I think the Vedantic tradition is a little different in that sense, where it's about the intuitive, inner experiential understanding of something, not the
I would like to add, even the case of the Nayayikas also, like when you study the primary texts and then the commentaries and sub-commentaries and the sub-commentaries, which were written in a response to the refutations that were happening during the 11th to, I guess, the 10th to 14th, 15th centuries CE. They're trying to revise a lot of things mainly on linguistic levels. Yeah, I don't mean to say this. This is my vivaksha. This is my abhipraya. I was not trying to say that. Like, so what happens at that point? The student himself or herself feels that the tattva actually is beyond language, because a whole revision of the terms and definitions is happening continuously, and there is no settling. There's no point where everybody's settling like this is enough. We need not revise anymore. Like when I was doing my PhD thesis, I found that many Vaisheshika philosophers change their siddhantas like anything. Like, for example, saying that Sankhya, for example, is treated as a guna or an attribute of a dravya in the Vaisheshik philosophy.
Interesting.
But there are a lot of problems with this thing, with the Sankhya. When we say that an attribute itself does not possess an attribute, a guna cannot have a guna in itself. So when we say there are 24 gunas, when we use the statement, Chaturvinshatir gunah, now the opponents of both Advaita Vedanta and other philosophies say that, see, you are using numbers in the gunas, that the gunas possess these numbers, which are gunas.
Yeah.
So after a point during like 16th, 17th centuries, the texts which appear in those ages, they gave up the idea that Sankhya is a guna. They changed it. This is some else, this is some other padarth. This is not guna, or you may treat it like this, but this is not guna at all. We cannot treat it as guna, because a lot of refutations were happening. So at that point of time, the student actually may feel that yato vacho nivartante aprapya manasasa. That reality is beyond language, and he would receive the same fate as a student of Advaita Vedanta. Ultimately.
So let me ask you this, right? So when you're talking like 12th, 13th century, the Vaisheshika school, even the Samkhya school, wasn't very strong on their own, right? They didn't have strong tradition. How did the Buddhists and the Jains at this time, right? How were they interacting with these schools? Because Buddhism, for the most part, had disappeared from in India, and Jainism was there, but it was much smaller. But they were still pretty prodigious in the Jains especially were very prodigious in their writings, you know. So I wonder, was there a lot of back and forth with the Jains at least in these schools?
I think it was happening. Like the text I dealt with, it did not name the authors from which it was the definitions of whom the author was trying to refute, or the ideas he was trying to refute. I had to find them. I made a probable list of the authors from which he took those ideas and refuted them. The debates or the mental churning was happening because every school wants to take every other school as a Purva Paksh, or any prominent school as a Purva Paksh.
Right.
Even in their own tradition. Like one Vaisheshik may take another Vaisheshik school, another Vaisheshik philosopher as his Purva Paksh. Right. If he thinks that it is he is not interpreting it properly. So the conversation was happening, and it's still happening if we look at the present day texts being written in the Sanskrit language from the Darshanashastra tradition, because the belief still is that you need to arrive both intuitively as well as argumentatively at a certain conclusion before you can trust it. Because see, you are talking about things that are beyond perception.
Correct.
So you need to have some ground, because like we are mostly rationals or logical people. So we need some ground on the argumentative level also.
Right.
And then from that, stepping on that is not the ultimate. Stepping on that, we may enter into the upasanas or the inward inquiry, where we might arrive at the intuitive stage. But before that, we have to do that. In that, I guess I have not specifically read the Jain works. I'm planning to do that. the Buddhist works also, but there was a lot of back and forth happening.
Right.
The Jainas say this, and like for example, the Tattva Pradipika, the commentary of Pratyak Swarupacharya on that text,
Right.
he gets very heated up while debating sometimes. So, and even the Prajnakar Gupta's commentary on the Pramana Vartik, for example, or the Buddhist text by Dharmakirti, there also you see the Sankhya say this, and they are saying it incorrectly because of these reasons. And it was this which was leading to the reforms or the revisions in those philosophies.
Right.
Like, had not these debates taken place, there would be no need to revise.
Yeah.
But the level of variation you see across the texts of a certain philosophy, for example, Vaishesika or Nyaya tradition, the variations or the variety of definitions and the concepts and changes that were happening were in response to these, and even those were changing.
Yeah, which is really interesting, because like when you look at the early Buddhist history and in relationship to the Hindu history, you don't find a lot of engagement with the Buddhists until 2 or 3 centuries after the Buddha is gone, and in the philosophical sense. And then that's when you start seeing the Buddhists start studying Sanskrit, right? Their texts go from being the Prakrit Pali into Sanskrit. And when they go into Sanskrit, they start getting linguistic knowledge of the Sanskrit language. And then they're able to play on the same playing field that a lot of these, various other darshanas are playing, right? Because the linguistic power of linguistics in Indian tradition is such a powerful tool, and the fact that you had Yaska or Panini before developed their grammarian traditions that all the dozens of others we've lost, they were really, really rigorous in the way they approached language and engagement.
Absolutely.
Do you think that, so I don't know if have you ever studied Bhattacharya, and did you get a chance to study him?
A few verses, I guess, once during my master's, I guess.
Oh, okay, because I haven't fully read him, and I'm really interested in his theory and how it connects to, because I do know some later Advaita traditions have started to try to incorporate him into their work. So I was wondering how that worked, if you knew at all.
Yeah. I cannot talk about it right now
Okay,
because I still would have to. Like, my plans of studying other texts are being postponed for a long time, because I'm taking classes during the day, and then I'm studying and revising my own texts, which I've planned, I've started to study. So it takes up a lot of time, and now I'll plan to study Bhartrihari, at least the Brahma Kand of his Vakyapadiya.
So do you when you're picking texts, are you picking texts for your own personal like development of sadhana, or are you picking texts more for intellectual engagement, or a mixture of both?
Mostly for intellectual development,
Uh-huh.
because I learned Sanskrit mostly from the prayogas,
Okay.
by the usage. So it interests me to read how they construct sentences, how they argue, and because like most of the arguments are very concise and very crisp in their construction, in the structure. They don't use verbs very often, and they use a lot of compound words. So for that purpose, I read a lot. Also, during this PhD thesis, I had to read a lot of texts to figure out what the person was quoting or
Right.
citing in his own text, because he did not name anybody. So mostly it is for intellectual purposes, but then the sadhana part, I take it only from the personal realm of bhakti. I've left it to that.
Okay.
I may get inspired. I may get inspired even by like reading a verse of Nagarjuna, and it reminds me of my own uh, bhakti part. Maybe,
Yeah.
like, go look back. There's nothing here. So then I may be like, oh, fine, sure, going back to Bhagavan Shiva now. But mostly it is for intellectual purposes, and obviously it is I'm earning my livelihood from this, so I
Sure.
need to keep up. So I try to read a lot of texts which I don't actually. I'm not as successful in my speed. I literally had to train myself to sit down and read things, because my mind and my brain runs too fast.
Okay.
So I had to
Okay.
tame it down. And yes, not basically for sadhana, but mostly for intellectual purposes.
Interesting. I mean, so do you also engage in the the dialectics going on today in Sanskrit with other scholars?
Sometimes, but I guess on Twitter only.
Oh, yeah, Twitter.
Maybe.
Okay.
Yeah, on Twitter. But in my department also, there are good scholars there, and we have a certain give and take there also. We pick up one idea. I may start a conversation. They may start a conversation about a certain portion of a shastra.
Mhm.
We may discuss it, and most of it is definitely dialectical in nature. If this word actually means this, or it may be construed as this or that.
Right.
It does happen there on a
Because I wonder, because so I do have a few books from the past 10, 15 years of Sanskrit scholars writing back and forth in Sanskrit on particular issues, right? And it sucks that I come from a Western world, and I come even my Sanskrit training, when I learned Sanskrit in India at Delhi University, it was the Western way, right? I learned it through Professor Prem Singh, who was part of the Sanskrit department at University of Delhi. So he studied, I think, under Engels or something back in in the 50s and 60s. So even the way I learned it wasn't the traditional way. I learned it through the modern way, using Whitney and those guys. So I have a different approach to it, and maybe it's not naturally the way it should be done, especially in India. So I do wonder, like, I've met a lot of scholars, and even the ones that studied in India. So a few of these guys, like Stephen Phillips, and a few of them studied in India for many, many years under panditas, right? They would stay with someone like N.S. Tatacharya and down in Pondicherry for 6, 7 years, 8 years, studying under this guru, or go to Kashi or Banaras and study there for a long time. What I do find is, not Stephen Phillips, but other professors I've seen, I've read, they take a lot of the ideas that the pundits have and the scholars have in India that are writing primarily in Sanskrit, probably don't know English very well, and they take them to the West and they use them when they don't really attribute them. And one of the things that sits with me is, why aren't more panditas and scholars in Sanskrit than India doing more engagement with Western, or I guess global Sanskritas? Because I'm sure there's a lot that they can learn or also teach.
A few of my students have been primarily trained in Gurukulas or the traditional Pathshalas. They confess to me sometimes that they might not be able to engage with the Western world because they're not good enough with English. And I usually try to impel them or motivate them to get some mastery over English also, because their perspectives need to be communicated to the West. Because they are coming from a living tradition. For us and for them, even I have not studied in a traditional setup, but I can connect with whatever is, like, for at least a few things that are written in the Shastras, because I see them happening around me.
Right.
Like for example, when we say, I've heard from my childhood, God is everywhere, God is in every particle or whatever. Bhagwan kan kan mein hai. Now, maybe I did not hear it at any pravachan setup or any katha vachan setup.
Yeah.
I heard it from people around me.
Right.
Everybody, even the maid auntie at my house help auntie at my place.
Right.
He was a Kabir Panthi, by the way.
Oh.
So she talks in those systems, in those ways. Okay. So these things are a living culture for us.
Correct.
These are not merely texts which we are studying and talking about in closed circles or writing in papers and publishing them and getting citations and all that. This is happening around us. So I
Sure.
tell them to get some mastery over English, basic mastery, so that they can study them and respond them with their own ideas,
Right.
with the living ideas.
Correct.
Yeah.
No, and I think that's so important because, so I'll give you an example. We have a professor that I know well. His name is Taneshwar Timosina. He's in San Diego. He's from a traditional Gurukula, right? So and he had to learn English and go out into the world to bring his perspective. But he's able to bring a more traditional Kashmiri Shaiva and a Gurukula perspective that is very different than other people that study these texts in the modern world, right? And I do think there's something that, this world is not getting smaller. I mean, it's not getting bigger and bigger. It's getting smaller and smaller and smaller. And as much as people are situated in the traditions, which they need to be, they just need to get those. They need to dispel some ignorance out there in the world, right? In some sense, there's so much ignorance about what these texts and tradition represent and how they even socially function. I do think there's these narratives that other people have told, which I don't think fits into the world that these people live in.
Absolutely, absolutely. Because again, there is a living tradition.
Yeah.
It may differ from the Shastras on most things, but you can see a lot of things happening around you which are written in the Shastras, and you can see how they work.
Right.
Their potency, their authority, you can see that around you. So that even in my case, until I started studying the texts properly, I had a lot of these ideas, the popular ideas in my brain.
Can you give me an example of one?
Like for example, that it is all the Brahmins' fault.
Mm-hmm.
The societal collapse or whatever what was happening, and because I studied the basic modern schooling system or the conventional schooling system, and you get these ideas from around you. So we used to discuss these at home, and my dad used to sit silent. Okay, you think about it,
right,
and you'll gradually arrive at a good conclusion. So when I started studying these texts, I started to question a lot of these ideas.
Yeah,
which was difficult because the refutations of these ideas are not very easily available.
right.
You might find, it was all good back then.
Yeah.
A lot of it. And the other side is it was all bad. It was the worst that was happening. So a very balanced approach was not very popular. Even today, many scholars are working on this, very good scholars. But their approaches and their ideas are not very popular, not very easily accessible.
Right.
For youngsters, for example, which is very important. So as a teacher at the university, I got this opportunity, luckily, where I could engage with the youngsters and motivate them to question more of these ideas.
Right.
And refer to and come back again and again to these traditional Sanskrit texts which they're studying, which they are lucky enough to study.
Right. So on that point, can we move? I mean, we can come back to the darshanas, but I kind of want to shift towards a social aspect of here. So you started really, I think in the past 2 years, I've been following you. You've been writing a lot about the various Dharmshastras and the misconceptions or the actual, the way we talk about it today, like for example, Manu being the text of all evilness in all Indian society, and for all the degradations and humiliation suffered by women, by Dalits, by OBCs, everything is all due to Manu. But you're able to provide a lot more clarity from the various commentators over time, plus the original text itself, right? Because Manu itself was written, 2,000 years ago, give or take a few hundred years on the either side. And who knows whether it's written by one person or group of people. I mean, that's a whole nother story. But can you talk a little bit more about fundamentally Manu Dharma Shastra? What is it? How did it function? Did it ever function as a law book that people followed? Or was it a theory book? What exactly was it?
So basically, the word itself, Dharmashastra, it is important, the word, because when we construe it as a law book, we are misinterpreting the word dharma. So dharma is a very shastric word.
Mhm.
It does not obviously necessarily mean law. There are things that do not fall into the legal system but do fall into the realm of dharma. For example, if we say, oh, like I have heard people say that the constitution of today's India is the new Smriti Shastra, the Dharma Shastra. It is not. Like once it starts talking about the prayashittas and the rituals and the various punyas one accrues on account of following his duties, then we can say that it may be a modern Dharma Shastra. So what Dharma Shastra does is mostly it talks about the dharma, which is the set of do's, mainly the do's, what a certain person who falls into a certain category should do in order to attain dharma or punya,
Got it.
which would secure him a better place in this world and also hereafter, moksha or swarga or whatever. So that is basically the dharma part. And the sources of dharma are various. Mostly it is the Shruti and Smriti. In this, the Smriti tradition is the Dharma Shastra tradition. Because Vedas are very in a very encoded form, you may say, because you cannot find a particular subject, oh, this in this part of the Veda, this subject has been discussed. Those are verses, and the Vidwans of the Veda extract certain topics from those verses in various ways according to their own tradition. So the Manu Dharma Shastra also falls in this in this category, where it talks about dharmas of every person in this area of the Brahmavarta, the Brahmadesh, the Brahmavarta, and Madhyadesh, Aryavarta, and I guess some 4 or 5 regions together. So it talks about the dharmas of the people of this region, what they need to do, what are the ideals they need to follow in order to attain a better position in this life and hereafter.
Got it.
So you need to see the text in this sense first. And regarding its application, we do find inscriptions and earlier historical documents where kings are praised in the sense that they follow the Dharma Shastra of Manu, which may be like a praise that, oh, he follows this tradition in a proper way, because the tradition tells that certain dharma, if a certain person follows properly, as the Shastra has said, he will definitely secure a good place. And anybody who does this is praised by the Aryas or the good people or the wise people.
Sure.
So it may be a mere sentence, or it may be true that the king may have referred to the Dharma Shastra once in a while, but you cannot say that oh, it was applicable as a law book in itself.
Right.
Because after a certain point, the Nibandha tradition on the Dharma Shastra started, where many Dharma Shastras were consulted for certain issues, and Manu obviously is the foremost of them. So forever at certain points, like Apararka Dev, the king of Shilahar, in his commentary on the Yajnavalkya Smritis, clearly says that whenever there is a conflict between Smritis or the Dharma Shastras, Manu Dharma Shastra rises above and its decision can be followed. Okay, so it has a prominence for some reason. There is some reason. There is something in the tradition that Manu is regarded as a very authentic person who spoke the dharmas clearly as they were written in the Vedas or as they were mentioned in the Vedas. It has been mentioned in the Manu Dharma Shastra also. So we need to see it from the perspective of dharma and not from the perspective of vyavahar. No, vyavahar is a term which is strictly used for legal purposes.
Right.
Tradition. So vyavahar is only one portion.
Right.
Is only one portion. The other portions are related to dharmas of each and every person in this region, which we call the Arya region of people. The Samanya dharmas which have been mentioned are for all people. Everybody can follow it. but mostly the specific dharmas are for this region where the Varnashram Dharma is being followed, basically.
Okay.
So there it applies, and it is definitely not a constitution. I don't see why it is being construed as a constitution of the former days, and because even in the caste censuses the British did and recorded, they talk about the personal laws of the kings.
Right.
Now the personal laws are different for different regions, and the kings may choose certain laws for their own. Even in the Dharmashastras also, we have different dharmas: Jati dharmas, Kula dharmas, Varna dharmas, Ashrama dharmas. There are a lot of dharmas that are happening, and a lot of diversity is maintained through the Dharmashastras.
Right.
Because even when a king acquires a new territory, the dharmas which are being followed in that region from parampara, those dharmas should not be stopped. They need to be followed, and he must ensure that they are followed even after he has acquired the territory and he becomes a formal king of the territory. So
Right.
in that sense, the personal laws, the Kula dharmas, Desha dharmas, and the Jati dharmas, Manu has basically compiled what was happening in his time and has presented an ideal.
Got it.
He has not intervened. Even the first scene that starts is Manu is sitting alone at a certain place, and the rishis come to him and ask him. He's not trying to interfere in the society. He's meditating on his own self.
Yeah.
Now the rishis come, they ask a question, and out of anugraha, he answers them.
Right.
Now he's not enforcing, or if you don't trust my shastra, you might be punished like this or that.
Yeah.
He's just suggesting, and so does Yajnavalkya Smriti and other Smritis also. You do not find in Manu Smriti a portion where it says that if you don't follow Manu Smriti, this would happen to you.
Right.
Okay. We have, like, if you don't follow constitution, you will be in the jail.
Yeah,
because you
that's
are
right. That's right.
doing illegal stuff. Okay. So it is strictly for dharma, and I call it prescriptive and suggestive text.
Right, because I mean, when you read the text, it's interesting because I mean the line back then in the ancient world between law, custom, ritual, spirituality was blurred. It wasn't like it was clear cut as it is today, right? So a concern, I mean, one of the questions I would have is, so in the Dharmashastras, right, they cover a whole host of these topics, and they come from the earlier Dharma Sutra tradition of Apastamba, Bodhya, and so on. Now, the Shastras themselves, in the topics they cover, who are they meant for? Who are they meant for? Are they meant for kings? Are they meant for scholars? Are they meant for regular people? I mean, who are the texts written for?
These are meant for literally everybody.
Okay.
There may be a debate on the adhikar of studying them traditionally and teaching them traditionally, that this person may be allowed or this person may not be allowed. But the anushthan adhikar, who can practice the things that have been told in the Dharmashastras,
right,
for whosoever anything has been said in this Dharmashastras, he has that adhikar that he can practice these things.
okay.
And why have they been said? It is for the benefit of these people. You do this, you'll be benefited from this.
Right.
That is the whole point. Like when they talk of like you follow dharma, and in this life you will attain praise,
right,
and benefit, and in the hereafter also, after your death, you might even attain moksha, because
right,
through the whole process, because see, this is a ritual based text.
right.
It is not you cannot call it a scientific text per se, a scientific text per se, because it does not say, oh, this process, by this process, this
right.
Unified process or this unitary process, everybody will enter and end to that portion, attain moksha or swarg or whatever. What these texts say is, you do this, it will be better for you if you do that.
Right.
It is for kings, for regular people, for officers, for people who are acting as judiciary, for the so-called low caste also. It is for
Right.
everybody.
Okay.
Like everybody, like when for example, the dharmas which are being discussed in the Dharmashastras are mainly of two types. First is the regular dharmas. When you are comfortable with your life, you have to do this, this, and this.
Right.
Okay, Brahman has to do this, Kshatriya, Vaishya, Shudra, and others also. Now, when the times are not comfortable, for example, say there is some drought happened in a region, there is shortage of food or whatever, shortage of money, or
Right.
a disaster happened in a place. Now the time is not regular, the time is not usual.
Apad.
Now apatkal.
Yeah, apad.
Now in the apatkal, there are apad dharmas, and in the apad dharmas, people can choose various livelihoods. Like when I talk of Shudra teachers, or it may be not just Shudra, anybody who is not a Brahmana, may be a teacher and be teaching the non-Vedic texts.
Right.
Or the texts which are not Vedas. Basically, Vedas are not open to literally anybody to teach. The other, like Vyakarana, Tarka Shastra, Ayurveda, one may learn it and then teach it.
Right.
So there are mainly two dharmas depending on the situations, and then there are other two categories of the Vishesh and the Samanya dharmas. The Samanya dharmas are for everybody. Practice them. Ahimsa, Satya, Asteya, Shaucha, Indriya Nigraha.
Yeah.
Well and good. You'll definitely attain praise and comfort in this life also, because you raise yourself to a higher level above all the noise. So you definitely will be good with that. And the Vishesh dharmas for specific classes of the society, they may perform that. But as they say, because this is Kali Yuga, a very chaotic time that is happening around us, things are not as they should be, obviously. This has been mentioned both in the Dharmashastras and the Puranas also. At least we can start with the Samanya dharmas.
Right.
We may begin with Ahimsa, Satya, Asteya, Shauch and Indriya Nigraha. And this is why this is not a constitution-like text, because constitutions don't talk about Samanya Vishesha dharmas which may accrue, which may give you punya and raise you to a higher level on the ritual side, on a metaphysical side.
Right. So we're touching upon this. We're talking, the Samanya dharmas, dharmas for everyone. What is the Varna Dharma, right? When we talk about Varna and its relationship to the text of do's and don'ts, and Varna includes things like intermarriage between communities, Anuloma, Pratiloma. How sometimes I struggle, like what is Manu trying to tell us here? And is it something that how do we approach it today? And was it ever followed in any real way? Because I mean, from my understanding, from when I read the Western stuff, it seems less and less likely it was followed, and that it was merely prescriptive in some sense, but not really descriptive. But I don't know.
Like at one day I had tweeted on the society which has been indirectly depicted in the Manu Smriti. And when you find the categories specifically named, the various categories of Pratilomas and the Anulomas, it is clear that marrying within your own Varna was not strictly followed.
Right.
Let us be very honest with that. Ideals are not followed by all people. That's why they are ideals.
Right.
Otherwise, that would be a very regular affair. Now, this is why it is a mostly a prescriptive text or a descriptive text, even descriptive in the sense that it is talking about the society, what all is happening, and why it is better to follow some ideals, which may give you some phala on a metaphysical level or on a ritual level. And when it defines the Varnas specifically in the 10th chapter, Manu Smriti, it talks about like who is a Brahmana.
Right.
Good question. So the answer is that when a Brahman and a Brahmani are married in a proper Pani Grahan Sanskar, with all the rituals and with all the basic qualifications, the offspring will be called a Brahmana. Same with the Kshatriya, Vaishya, Shudra. Now there you will read that it is only when it is the Pani Grahan Sanskara has happened properly with all the proper qualifications that the child will get the Varna of the parents,
Right.
of his parents, not otherwise. Which is why I recently saw a speech or a presentation by Nitin Sridhar. He's a very active person on these matters.
Yes, I know Nitin well. I had him on the show once.
Yeah. He presented a nice interpretation of this, that Varna is more like a ritual state and not not like a social category, because certain you get adhikar to perform certain dharmas only when you fulfill those tick points, when you tick those circles or tick those boxes. It is only when you get these. For example, if somebody is born from a Brahmani and the husband is a second husband, the offspring will not be a Brahman by birth. Okay. Dutiyena tuyah pitra savarnayam prajayate avavat iti khyata Shudra Dharma sajatita. This is probably from Vasishtha or Vyas, I guess. Manu Smriti. Many commentaries on the Manu Smriti talk about this verse. Now, what it tells is that only if you fulfill those ritual
will you be a Brahmana?
Rules of the Pani Grahan Sanskar, that okay, the man and a woman are virgins, like both should be the first timers into the and also there should be all other categories fulfilled, the gotra, the pravar, and everything else. And then if it happens, then if the offspring happens with the proper sanskaras, it will be a Brahmana. And similarly for others. This is why it is a very lofty ideal. Which is why in the Mahabharata also, while Yudhishthir and Nahush are conversing with each other, they say that it is very difficult to determine the jati of a person now. And similar, you find a mention by Adi Shankaracharya in the 8th century in his Brahma Sutra Shankara Bhashya, where he says very mentions in a indirect manner that during his time the Varna Ashrama Dharma are almost extinct. Okay. So if I look back at Manu Smriti, what the society there, the society which has been depicted in it, there also you find that the ideals are ideals. They're not being followed by literally everybody. Okay. Like for example, a Brahman marrying a Shudra woman is not considered good. But you find mention of Parashavas and Nishadas, who are offspring of those people, and their dharmas have been discussed. How the property would be divided among them, it is being discussed. So it means that those categories were there, were very real, were in a good proportion, which is why they were named. Okay. So, and again, today even, the ideals are there. Some people are following, not everybody.
But I also, so this is where it's interesting to me, right? So like, if you say a Brahmana married a Shudra and their son is a Nishada or Parshva, do you think that Brahmana and his wife will treat that Nishada any differently, their son, as a term? That term is something that someone outside is looking in and saying, this is what you are, but the family itself has its own dynamic of the way it approaches, right? Because at the same point here, we're looking at a system where probably the law, so to speak, wasn't involved very much in the rules of descent. It was done just naturally.
Absolutely. If you read the text attributed to Ashwaghosh, it is called Vajrasuchi, where he attempts to refute the Varna and Jati theory of the Dharmshastras. He mentions that even Chandalas are getting sanskaras like Upanayana this time.
Which is good. Fine.
Okay. Why is it important? Because he's trying to refute it, trying to refute the whole Dharmashastra system, or at least the idea of Varna by birth or whatever.
Yeah.
And when it comes like, oh, if somebody becomes a Brahman by getting sanskaras, he mentions all these categories. Like they are getting Upanayan and other sanskaras.
Right.
And many of them are studying Vedas also, traditionally in their own setups. Now, again, what you mentioned, that a Brahman father would not technically, if like as a father, he would not treat them differently.
Right.
Like, oh, you are a Parashava, you stay away from me or whatever.
Yeah.
Or you don't do this or that. There would be, again, it is for the outside people. Also, Medha Tithi at one point, when the Sakhya is being mentioned, that who can have a friendly relation with a certain Varna or not. He does mention that Parashavas are Kul Mitras, or the family friends, or close friends of Brahman families, because again, the ancestry.
Yeah.
Like the sons of the same father or the same grandfather or whatever. So they had amicable relationships.
Right.
Also, at one point in the, I guess, the 5th verse of the 10th chapter in Manu Smriti, at the exact end of his commentary, Medha Tithi states something which is very important, which is reflection of which may be a reflection of his society. He says that it is impolite to directly ask for one's jati.
Yeah.
Why is it impolite? It means that although texts may write something, oh, this is a Parashava, this is a Chandar or whatever, asking directly about someone's jati was not considered good.
Right.
At least among the Aryas.
Right.
Okay. So it tells something about the setup where maybe socially these things may not have been that relevant. In the sense that, again, if one father is having children from, or like Brahman father is having children from all 4 Varnas, the wives of all 4 Varnas, he may not treat them differently, too differently.
Right.
Because he's a father. And that is why the system as a whole, where fathers are having progeny from various Varnas, the system may not be as strict or as ugly as it is depicted.
Right.
Which is why you see that in the Ashwaghosha's Vajrasuchi. He's literally depicting, oh, this is happening right here.
Right. You know, it's also, I mean, on this point, I find it also telling, because you must have had these brahmanas, roughly at the time of, say, Medha is what, 11th century, roughly around there, right?
10th, 11th, yeah.
Yeah. So at that time is when you started seeing, or maybe a little before that, you saw a lot of the Hindu brahmanas and merchants go to Southeast Asia, right? In that period of time where they're going with their traditions and cultures, and they go there and then they bring these texts with them, and they bring these Varnas with them. And suddenly you have Varnas in Southeast Asia. But the Varna system as they practice there is not anywhere close to the system that's practiced in India, right? So, and then you have the text at the same time saying things like crossing the ocean, you lose your status. If you go for 3 days without doing, Sandhya Vandana, you lose your status, right? The Brahma Sutra, I mean, the Dharma Sutras would say things like, if lightning strikes while you're doing studying the Vedas, you have to stop studying the Vedas and go take a shower. There's these really deep ritualistic rules for every aspect. Where the way I think about it is, when I read the Dharma Sutras, like I belong to the Apastamba, so I look at this, I'm like, at any given point in any given day, I'm inherently ritually impure to do any sort of anything, right? So it seems to me almost onerous to a point where you couldn't be ritually pure if you followed every one of these rules, and you just no way to do it. So it just seems they put as many rules together and say it'd be best to do this. But then the thing I also find is, if you can't do this, do this. If you can't do this, do this. If you can't, it's like this cascading effect of of different things one can do. It comes down to at best, sip water and appreciation of them. You're good.
Yeah, exactly. No, this has been discussed like in the I guess towards the last portion of Vishnu Purana. Vyas is depicted as saying that Kali Yuga is good, Shudras are good, and women are good.
Yeah.
And when asked, he says that, see, the Dvijas find it very difficult to do what they want because they are too bound by the rules.
Yeah.
They are paratantra. They have to hear Shastra or they will fall from the status. But see, the Shudras, they don't have such restrictions. They are rather free to do what they want, and
Right.
the effects that are generated by the Dvijas following all the rituals and all the rules, the Shudras can get them simply by serving the Dvijas.
Yeah.
Which is rather easy. Now, how Vyas is depicting, it tells you how these rules were not actually something very comfortable or very happily to be applied.
Yeah.
Which is why I say, see, I am from a Brahman family. My grandfather and great grandfather, they were not ritualists. They were not priests by profession. They did not follow all such things. They were rather following apad dharmas.
Yeah.
Because of economic conditions.
Yeah, like I am.
Simply. So, what the Dharmshastras or the Puranas even, which are considered as pramanas in the Dharmashastra themselves, they give this thing called Bhakti. Specifically for Kali Yuga. Specifically. Why? Because they say that it is the Yuga Prabhava or the influence of the Yuga that you cannot remain pure all the time. So, Shraddha in the Bodhayana Dharma Sutra, Shraddha is called the best penance, the highest penance, or the highest good that you can do. So, when there is a rival or say an opposition between Shraddha and ritual purity, Shraddha wins.
Right.
Because with Shraddha, your bhav becomes Shuddha. And as Manu has said, that every ritual, the Veda Dhyayana, the Dana, Tapa, etc., is waste if your mind is impure, if your mind is indisciplined. So the inner stability, which for which I think Bhakti is the best possible method,
right,
with which you can stabilize yourself and make your mind purer, not purest in the sense it does become pure. So for Kali Yuga specifically, Bhakti has been introduced, which is technically yoga, if you say properly, in the sense of the Yoga Sutras, Ishvara Pranidhana, which is Bhakti itself.
Yeah, but Krishna himself says, Vedeshu Yagneshu Tapastu Chaiva Dharyeshu Yat Punyapalam Patishtam, right? You know, it's the same thing. Like all these things, at the heart of it comes down to devotion or looking to Bhakti.
Absolutely.
Towards,
there is no substitute to Shraddha. Even while performing the rituals, if you do not have faith in the ritual, if you do not have the faith in the statements of the Shastras which are governing those rituals, there is no use of performing it.
Right.
As simple as that.
Except for Harinama, as they say, is just chanting the name.
In the case of Nam, and even in the case of the Brahma Yajna, if you simply do the Akshara part, simply, without even knowing what it means, it accrues some punya. And in the case of Nam, it is something else completely.
Yes.
The case of Ajamil, for example.
Yes.
He did not even intend to chant it. He simply spoke his child's name, Narayana. And he got benefit. So this is why the Nama Smarana, when it started, like which we call the Bhakti movement or the Bhakti Andolan, I don't believe in the terms.
No, I don't either. Yeah.
Right. So it is a tradition, the Vedic tradition itself.
Yes.
You have the Nama Smarana or the Nama Japa references in the Vedas themselves.
Right.
Where did I find these references? From texts like Bhagavan Nama Kaumadi and such other texts, which were written by Mimamsakas, for example, like Anantadev. So there you find they try to establish that Nama Smarana, Bhakti in all its forms, is present in the Vedas, and it has no virodh with the Dharmashastras, which do not technically explicitly mention Bhakti.
Right.
Okay. So when they mention Prayaschittas, the Dharmashastras mention a lot of Prayaschittas. You have to do this. If you do this, you accrue some paap or a sin, and to wash it off, you have to do this prayaschitta. Now, in Namasmarana, you read a lot of claims which the Puranas say that they are not arthavadas, they are not praises. They're true. If you chant Nama, it definitely will do what has been said, what has been claimed.
Yeah.
So, is there a virodh in both these statements? So, like Anantadev, for example, or I don't remember who, in such a Sanskrit text on Bhakti, they say there is no virodh. Those prayashittas are for those who are not bhaktas. That is another category. For bhaktas, there is this. For a bhakta, the closest to him that can purify is Nam and Bhagavan. Simply. So, the best thing to do in case of anything you feel that, oh, you have committed some extremity, or you have not followed, or you have incurred some impurity, chant Nam, ask for forgiveness, and that's it. And do and take a good course of action after that. So there is no virodh. Whatever has been said in the Dharmshastras, it has been taken by those authors of those granthas as referring to as for those who are not bhaktas, who do not believe in the system of bhakti, and for the bhaktas there are these statements in the Puranas which they should follow, which are easy to perform, for which you do not have to follow a lot of rules and regulations. Like chanting the name of God, you can do it anywhere in any avastha. Just like there is apavitra pavitro va sarvavastham gato piva yasmaret pundalikaksham sabbahyabhyantara shuchi. Now, it is not arthavad. If you think that it is only a praise to promote Nam Japa, you will accrue a paap on yourself, for which you will have to do some prayashit. So, it is true, and it is specifically for the so-called terrible times of the Kali Yuga, where there is one benefit which Vyas says in the Vishnu Purana, that there are several wrongs that are happening in Kali Yuga, but there is one benefit, that whatever punya or effect one got by performing a lot of rituals and dhyan and tap in the previous yugas, you can simply get those by chanting the name of God. As has been said. So, I feel that for these times, those who can follow the rituals, well and good. Do that, keep continuing that. If you are in the parampara, follow that. Those who cannot follow can do at least this. Follow the Samanya Dharmas. And if they are bhaktas, all the more good. It is the best thing that you have Shraddha and you have your Ishtadev. And if you get a Diksha, it is also better because it is a proper ritual that happens. You follow certain rules even there. After getting Diksha, you have to restrict yourself. And if not, simply chant the name of God.
Absolutely.
Because there is no substitute for Shraddha at all.
No. And I'll tell you, just from my own experience, like whenever I'm doing any sort of work that doesn't require my full mental attention, it's just, Nama Sankirtan all the time. Honestly, it makes the entire, whatever you're doing, fly by much easier, it literally lifts a burden, right? You're not thinking about the thing you're doing. No, you're just the name itself is reinvigorating. It's, even when I go to the gym, sometimes it's just me, saying a name while I breathe. It's really nice. But I want to ask you this, right? So the hard question here is, how would you respond to, say, we call them the modern Unbaker movement, or the modern idea of caste as we talked about it today, and all the burdens of the history of caste being put onto the Shastras, right? Onto the Dharmshastras, as if the entire corpus of these things created this oppression of people. I mean, and we have to also be truthful insofar there has been oppression over time, and there was probably no golden age that we can conceive of in a way that was perfect in some time or place, or even close to perfect. Human relations are complex and nuanced, and we have our own natural desires, right? Manu himself is the one that says the three things that men have. What is it? eating, sleep, and sex, right? And then you have the last thing they have that's separate from animals is reason. But in that sense, right, the eating, sleeping, and sex drives our problems with each other, right? You know, and so how would you respond to these ideas and these claims about the Shastras being the origin and the cause of the problems of today in terms of casteism?
See, again, as you have said, humans are of various kinds. The relationship between humans is very complex, sometimes very unpredictable. And definitely we cannot say that at a certain point of time in India, in the previous geographical borders and political borders also included, there was a time when everything was good. That is too much to expect. And we do not have this concept of everything being good in the samsara. We have, in fact, we do believe that samsara is inherently of the form of dukh instead of sukha.
Right.
Which is why we meditate and we do bhakti or rituals or whatever. Regarding the Shastras being like dictators or such things, I do not believe that. Firstly, because of the testimonies of Ashwaghosh, for example, and Adi Shankaracharya himself, when he says that the Varnashrama dharmas are almost avyavasthita in his times, like they're not as they should be. Why? Because you cannot force Shastras onto people. Like even today, when constitution and the rules and regulations are verily existent and people are told to be compliant with them, do they comply by their own will?
No, most of them don't.
Okay. Now, we can see transgressions happening all the time. In the parking spaces, in the queues also, where it is written that you should stand in a queue and they're not standing in a queue. Now, what those stand in a queue like statements are, those are prescriptive, that if you stand in a queue, it would be better for everybody. And if you don't stand in a queue, you'll suffer and make everybody, make every else standing here suffer.
Right.
In this sense, from the evidences that you find with the various interpretations, very differed interpretations of the verses of the Dharmashastras, it tells you that society was working on itself. Parampara. Shastras only tried to record them. And for example, when you have these issues of unknown Varna Sankaras in Manu Smriti, like there are the people who are born of mixed Varna marriages, and people don't know that they are born of mixed Varna marriages. Now, how do you recognize them? So the Manu says that you should look at their karmas or their actions, how they perform. So the commentators also say, I have written an essay on this, on Varna, on my Medium page.
Okay.
I've cited a lot of these stuff, and there the commentators say, oh, see, they will naturally be impelled to do those certain jobs as are written in the Shastras. So if there is a Chandal, he'll definitely perform that certain prescribed job as has been mentioned in Manu Smriti or whatever. Now, what they're trying to say is that even if you do not know the person, that he belongs to a certain mixed Varna marriage, he's an offspring of a certain mixed Varna marriage or certain specific Pratiloma or Anuloma Jati, you can infer that from his action, which means that the actions were happening already. And the Shastra merely recorded, like for example, you talked about Panini. Panini did not create Sanskrit in his own room while sitting in a corner. He recorded, he noted down the various usages of that language, which we call Sanskrit. Now, if somebody says, and many I've seen a lot in Sanskrit scholars, they take the sutras very seriously as their rules. The sutras are rules. But then you see the very celebrated Sanskrit authors and poets who transgress those rules. Okay, so what I want to say is that Shastras do not bind people because they cannot.
Right.
They cannot do that. They're literally texts recorded in some time, in some temporal point, and people might come to them in case of troubles to get some upadesh or some method to attain some betterment in their course.
Sure.
But people do not refer to them all the time. Like, how many times do you refer to a dictionary in your day? Really, only when you are stuck on some word and do not know the meaning, you go to that place. Usually, even today, there are rules that are said to be followed, but they're not followed because nobody can force people to follow them.
Right. I mean, so on this point, I mean, a couple of things, right? I think I have one as a response, as a pushback is, we see throughout history, whether you look at the Bible or any other text that has been used to oppress others, to control others, right? So one aspect is that people can say, well, the texts are there, but they're used by people. My only response, and I'll just say, then you can tell me what your thoughts are, is this is where I was like, from my own study of Indian history and Indian society, from both the Western scholars and Indian scholars, there doesn't seem to be very much evidence that, first of all, there was any structure developed by the kings or the authorities by vis-a-vis laws or enforcement to enforce any of these rules that the Dharmshastras talk about, whether or not it's going to be marriages between communities, or whether it's going to be punishment for sleeping with a brahmana, because Manu Shastra says at one point that if you're Shudra, you sleep with a brahmana, the part that you use you should be cut off, whatever. I don't see any of that being played out in anything. Or, for example, when you talk about even the Gita, I mean, in the Bhashyas of Ramanuja and Shankara, where they talk about molten lead being poured into the ear of a Shudra if he were to hear.
That is very interesting. I would like to elaborate on that a bit.
Yeah. So yes, we can. And I'm saying is, so for maybe that you have information here, but I have not seen any scholar write about how any of these things were enforced. And like, for example, if I talk about American slavery and the Bible, I can talk about how the laws of America enforced slavery in America, or even Rome. When you look at Rome and ancient Rome, or the Greco or the Greeks enslaving Helots, and across the world, or the Islamic communities enslaving war concubines and slaves from war. I mean, even within the Dharmashastra tradition, even though it says, like, for example, a king can take over the kingdom, he could take the people over. If they don't want to be there for a while, he has to send them back. I mean, there's rules like that were in place. So I don't know if. So again, I guess my point is, I don't know if these things were ever followed, and I don't think there was any system to make a society follow these rules the way that they're described.
I would start with the specific mention of the Gautama Dharma Sutra, where the molten lead and all that, which has been said. So interestingly, we may differ about how it was followed or not followed.
Sure.
But how I go about is, I check how the traditional scholars of those times, of the earlier times, interpreted these statements. So I found Medhatithi discussing this point in Manu Smriti. I guess the verse is 2.2, second chapter, 241, verse number 241. Now there, what he does is, he only mentions this to suggest that it should not be done.
What should not be done?
Like, the Vedas should not be learnt in a traditional manner by the Shudras.
Got it. Okay.
Because why? So what he says is that it is inferred by the statement. It is inferred by the statement that it should not be done.
Right.
And after that, he discusses other things, that if it is done, what happens? Now, if it is done, what happens is that the sub-brahmachari, the brahmacharis who are studying with the person, will accrue pap on them.
Okay.
Now, if it is done and this dand is being followed, how would he accrue pap on the brahmacharis because he would be dead by then.
Right.
Because there is also, if he learns the Ved properly,
Yeah.
dharane sharir bheda, it has been said. So he like technically by the book he is to be killed.
Yeah.
But what Medhatithi takes it to be is only a suggestion that it should not be done.
Okay.
And he says it is inferred. Why he's inferring? Because it is not directly seen that Shudras are being killed for these things.
Right. So, I mean, the way the point I think you're driving is when some people say, "Oh, I can't believe he broke that law; he should be killed." It's the idea that you're not really going to kill the guy for breaking
Exactly.
the stealing. It's this hyperbolic nature.
No. The problem with this is colloquial expressions are at one place, but when statements come from the Dharmshastras or the Dharma Sutras, those are taken to be the person, the author was very serious when he said this.
Okay.
So then the question becomes, if it was followed, first people think that it was definitely followed because it is written in Dharmashastra, and the tradition was very Brahmanical, and the kings were kings were following the Brahmanas and the Purohitas, and definitely they were following these diktats and these rules.
Right.
But when you study the traditional interpretations,
you
find variation. Why variation? Because the kings were literally not following each word of the Dharmashastras.
But even to your point, Dr. Sharma, here's the thing. It's like, for example, it says one shouldn't hear the Vedas, right? It's not to learn the Vedas. The word is hearing here in this case.
No. The two commentaries. One.
No, I'm not the commentary interpretation, the direct interpretation, right? Or the direct translation. So when it says hearing the Vedas, they were done publicly. The Vedic yagyas were done publicly, right? So obviously it couldn't mean that.
No.
If you do an Ashwamedha yagya, it's going to be done publicly. They use Vedic chanting. If you use... So what I'm saying is, like, if that's done publicly, even if in temples at that time, if you had temples, you would do the homas, yajnas publicly. People can hear, so that I don't think they're meaning that directly, is what I'm saying.
See, in Manu Smriti, in another of my posts on the Medium, Manu Smriti discusses certain anadhyayas, or when the Vedas shouldn't be recited or shouldn't be chanted. One is that where there is a lot of public gathering.
It should not be.
It should not be. So in that sense, it says that there are a lot of rules and regulations when the Vedas should be chanted or not. But the point here is the expression upashrinvatah or upashravana. Upashravana means coming close and hearing. Has a sense of coming close, and it has been interpreted as when a Shudra, by the two commentators, Haradatta Mishra and Maskari. We have two commentaries on the Gautama Dharma Sutras. They interpreted it as he desires to learn it. He's not merely listening to it. He desires to learn it and memorize it. So he comes and he listens. Now, interestingly, at one point in the commentary by Nanda Pandit of the Vishnu Smriti, he mentions an interpretation of this. He says, see, if the person, like for example, a Shudra, is hearing Ved by darpa or ghamand or like, what would we translate ghamand in English? Or the darpa or pride, for example. Pride. Oh, I want to hear. I'm hearing them. So then there is this pap or this dand or whatever. But when Shudra keeps a Brahman in the middle, like I'm a Shudra, there's a Brahman here, and then there is who's chanting the Vedas, there is no issue. Now, then also he's listening very attentively. But there is no issue. So there are various interpretations of these rules, but the main portion is when there is an Ashrita Shudra. Ashrita Shudra is the Shudra who goes to a Dvija, especially a Brahman, and stays with him, serves him. He would definitely hear Vedas being chanted at his home while serving him. So saying that, oh, this would be in a case of punishment, every Shudra at a Brahmana's home would be killed by then. Because he would definitely at a point memorize it. Because when, for example, a person is chanting some Veda mantra during Sandhya Vandana or some Nitya Homa or Agnihotra, It is being chanted every day. He would
Yes.
memorize it unintentionally also. So dharane sharir bhed would maybe be a case there. So or even the pouring of molten lead in the ears, it is too much. It cannot be practiced.
Right.
Because an ashrita Shudra or a Shudra who stays with a Brahmana is an ideal for a Shudra. So in that case, any Shudra wouldn't go to a Brahmana. So the whole purpose doesn't get fulfilled.
Right.
The purpose fails.
Right.
So what the traditional interpretations of this so-called dand or punishment is, it only asserts that it should not be done.
Right.
And how we can confirm this is during the Apashudradhikaran of Brahma Sutras, the Bhamati Vyakhya of Vachaspati Mishra and Anandagiri's Nyaya Nirnaya, they discuss and elaborate on a statement of Shankaracharya where he talks about the Laukika Samarthya of studying Vedas or learning Vedas. Now, the Laukik method is whatever we do at our universities in the Sanskrit departments.
Yeah.
We don't get Shishyas in by doing some Sanskar or Vidyarambha or Upanayana.
Yeah.
We get them in through admissions. We take books, we recite the books, they study the books and learn the verses.
Yeah.
Now, this is a Laukik study of Vedas.
Yeah.
Now, the rules which say or which are interpreted as prohibiting the study of Vedas by the Shudras are only applicable to the traditional study of Vedas. Staying with the Guru, following the Vratas, and spending like 12 years at least, mastering a Shakha or whatever. There is no prohibition regarding the Laukik methods. And it created some controversy on the Twitter when I posted that, because it may have not been, it may not have caught attention of the scholars, maybe, I think. But both Vachaspati Mishra and Anandagiri, they don't give any prohibitive verses to prohibit those Laukik methods. Because all they say is that, oh, Shudra can get Vedic education by studying books and other such methods. So he would again get the adhikar of Brahma Vidya, because you said that the one who has the knowledge of Vedas can get Brahma Vidya. So even a Shudra can get that. And he would understand the Vedas also, because he somehow knows Sanskrit also. He knows the Vedic dialect of Sanskrit also. So what they say is that they treat it as a possibility, and they simply say, because he is Anupanita, he has not received Upanayana and has not studied the traditional way, he will not get the benefits as the benefits would have been received by the Dujas by studying the Vedas in the traditional way, which is Abhyudaya and Nishreyasa. So they cancel out this option of a Shudra receiving Brahma Vidya via Vedas.
Interesting.
So the Laukik method, which literally we are doing these days, studying through books, listening to audio methods, audio-visual recordings of Vedas, and we may chant them, but they don't accrue the same benefit.
Interesting. Because we
which is
haven't
why
got
the prohibitive rules.
Yeah.
Which is why the prohibitive rules do not apply to them. Which is very evident from the commentaries of Anandagiri and Vachaspati Mishra on those sutras.
Right. I mean, but we also know, many Shudras were scholars of Sanskrit that wrote texts.
Yes, absolutely.
Absolutely. And many of the times they had to know some Vedic texts for them in order to write these various texts, right? Are you the one that also mentioned the Sudra Dharma text too?
Yes.
So
Sudra Dharma Tattva of Kamalakar Bhatta.
Yeah. So can you talk a bit about what that is? Interesting enough.
Yeah. It is a text from the 16th, 17th centuries, written, composed by Kamalakar Bhatta, a very prominent author of Dharmshastric texts. So he created this text specifically for the dharmas of Shudras.
Okay.
The acharas and the dharmas of the Shudras are mentioned, and all the categories which constitute the Shudra Varna. Basically, anybody, even who is a Pratiloma or Anuloma, can be categorized as a Shudra.
Okay.
In all practical purposes, although he's not purely a Shudra Varna, but is eligible for the Shudra Dharmas.
But does this also include like Chandalas and
absolutely,
everything.
Absolutely.
So everyone that we would call OBCs and Dalits and all these other groups today. Okay.
Yeah. So in that, where the sanskaras are discussed, we get the sanskar called Vidyarambha.
Yeah, beginning of
The
knowledge. Yeah,
Shudras.
yeah.
And then you travel to the quotations or the citations that he has given
Yeah,
of Markandeya and others. It simply mentions that any child of the age of 5 years,
yeah.
he is or she is eligible for the sanskar. And what would
Vidyarambha.
be studied? Uh, the vidya of the parents, what they have, definitely. They would want the child to study that. They go to the acharya, do the puja. Saraswati puja, as is popularly also known in
Yeah,
some parts of the country. And then the study will start. So Vidyarambha Sanskar happening at around the age of 5 years of any child, uh, be it Shudra or a Brahman or whatever. That is the part where the education which is separate from the Vedic education starts. Vedic education begins with Upanayana.
right.
Upanayana is specifically for Vedic studies. The Shastras happen after that. Once you mainly the portion which is mainly studies is the Vedas. Side by side, the Vyakaran and other Vedangas are studied, and the other Shastras, Tarka Shastra and other Shastras are studied. But Vidyarambha has been mentioned by Kamalakar Bhatt specifically as a sanskar of Shudras, which you can see at certain portions when you see Shudra scholars having such great knowledge and composing texts. There must have been some traditional entry point, and which has been recorded in the reports by the British people when they arrived here and they studied what kind of education system are these people practicing, and you find the mention of these rituals like the Saraswati Puja or the Vidyarambha Sanskar.
Well, if you think about this, right, even going back to the far as Mahabharata, Ugrashrava Sauti, right? Sautis, they would fall under kind of this group of people. And his father, Lomaharshana, were incredibly knowledgeable with the entire tradition of the Puranic Vedic knowledge that came down to them.
Exactly.
And then furthermore, I always say to people is, so this is a formalization of a process in a period of time when people learned directly from parent to child, right? This was not like, we didn't have universities that we have today. We didn't have massive schools where people were learning a standardized curriculum of knowledge across the board. You had people that learned from their parents their trade and their craft, whether it's going to be like a potter or a horseshoe maker or cobbler, brahmana, or any of these traditions, a merchant, whatever. You're learning from your parent. And maybe there were schools that taught you stuff, but guilds,
So
in fact.
the
Sainis.
Basic education was available.
Yeah.
To almost to every social class.
In the Gurukulas?
Be it Gurukulas, be it Pathshalas also. It could be Pathshalas, which were not necessarily Gurukulas, because Gurukulas mainly, I think, they reflected more of the Vedic education.
Sure.
Where the person had to spend a lot of time, the Dvijas had to spend a lot of time studying Vedas.
Yeah.
But the other, because see, the most productive from the point of a GDP, the Shudras and the Vaishyas, the other social classes, they had to complete their education fast and start producing things.
Yeah.
Because that is what is running the country.
Right.
From the economic and the financial perspective.
Absolutely.
So they did get basic education of, reading, writing, mathematics, Sanskrit, and because the standard texts were in Sanskrit, so you had to know Sanskrit to read them and understand them. And after that, you may go to, because in the Apad Dharmas which are mentioned in the Manu Smriti, in I guess the chapter number 10, verse 116, Vidya is mentioned as a livelihood for every
teaching, knowledge,
So you cannot use Vidya as a profession if you do not have Vidya.
Right.
And the Vidyas which are mentioned are Tarka Shastra, Vaidyak, which is Ayurveda.
Yeah.
You cannot be like a Neem Hakim who's like, I've learned some nuskhas or some such basic remedies and I'm now an Ayurvedic physician.
Yeah.
That does not happen.
No.
And even Tarka Shastra, you need to at least read one text and master it before you are called a Tarka Shastri or you start teaching it.
Yeah.
So there was some opening or opportunity in the sense of Vidyarambha Sanskar, or maybe another tradition which was followed back then, where people from across the social classes had an opportunity to get basic education some of them who were financially well off, who could afford such time and expenditure for education, like it happens today. Not everybody studies or goes to study.
Yeah.
There are various considerations regarding your family, who is earning in the family. If it is only you who are earning, or you are the next one who is
Right.
going to earn, you concentrate on the more functional aspects and not merely intellectual aspects.
Right.
Okay, so in that sense, whoever got an opportunity did get education. And up to the 15th, 14th century, when I recently got hold of Sant Ravidas, who's a very prominent saint in
Yes,
the
yes.
tradition, and the kind of vocabulary he uses,
Right, right. Even
I posted
Tukaram.
about it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
all these people, their vocabulary is inundated with Vedanta, with
Exactly. They're
yeah.
very specific. They're very specific and very shastric. Though those terminologies, even like saying, oh, 3 kinds of dukkhas. Like,
Yeah.
who knows 3 kinds of dukkhas?
Yeah.
Like, anybody, ask anybody.
Yeah.
So adi bhautik, adi daivik, and adhyatmik dukkhas.
Yeah.
And then you talk about brahmaik rasa. That is a very specific terminology of the Vedanta. Like, these are not words that regular people use. So it means that so again, regarding Sauti, for example, it has been discussed in the commentaries of Bhagavad Purana. Like, it is being depicted that Ugrashrava, for example, Ugrashrava is has Brahma Vidya, has Vidya of Dharmshastras also. But how did he get it? He is a Shudra, and according to Upashudradhikaran, he shouldn't have got.
He got it from Vyasa.
Yeah. So Veera Raghavacharya, I guess, in his commentary, he says that he got the knowledge not via Shastra but through Upadesha. So now we have other 2 kinds of systems in which one can get educated. One is the Shastra style, studying a particular Shastra and then getting knowledge from that. And the other is Upadesha. And most of our Shastras are also Upadeshas. You study Upanishads, and even the texts from the 10th, 9th century, they are conversational in style.
Yes.
Somebody is asking and somebody is replying. So Upadesh is also a method which is to date used. People go to these saints and the gurus and they ask them, I have this problem, how should I overcome it? And they give Upadesha.
Yeah.
So via Upadeshas also, people did get, I can say it confidently, they did get, at least some of them, they did get knowledge, relevant knowledge, which was suited for them. And I do say that when we talk about Bhakti Andolan and Bhakti movement, the so-called Bhakti Andolan and Bhakti movement, there also the saints did follow the Shastras, the rules regarding the Shastras. When Sant Ravidas also says that Bhakti does not mean that you forsake the system of your Kula Dharma. You have to follow it. So in the ritual side of education, because we did not get education in purely intellectual style. Education was something which was connected with dharma, which gave you punya, and every kind of person tried to participate into it through dana, through dakshina, and through all those stuff. And when education is related to moksha, for example, in the Darshana Shastras, when I say that, they say that if you study them properly, you get knowledge and you get moksha. Now, moksha is something very ritualistic, technically, that you enter a process, you follow the rules, and you end up being liberated.
Right.
Now there you have to follow the rules. If you go by your own self, oh, I can do anything I want. Now there, the bhav has get polluted, and there would happen some hindrance in your way to moksha, and you'll be hanging in the midst of moksha and your present place, and you'll be nowhere. So then it is said that through bhakti and through all other things, humbly you humbly have to surrender yourself to the procedures.
Right.
You have to trust them. You have to trust the master. You have to trust the upadeshas, because these things are not directly perceivable. Yato vacho nivartante and all that.
Yeah.
The categories and the systems which are being talked about are imperceptible to directly by humans. So you have to trust the processes. You have to trust the instructions, And if you cannot follow the higher instructions, you can come back to the lower ones, come back to the still lower ones.
Yeah.
But you have to settle somewhere.
Right. You have to have a process. I think
Absolutely.
this is the part I think a lot of people seem to gloss over is much of the Shastras and the limitations are about personal practices of people, right? Whether or not it's not about how you engage with the world out there, it's what you're doing in the home.
Absolutely.
Why does everyone want to do Sandhya Vandanam every day? Why does anyone want to do the the Panchamahayagnas at home every day? Like these are practices for a particular group of people, and each groups of people have their own practices. And in order to learn these practices, you have to go to Veda Pachala, right? Or Gurukula to learn how to do this properly, right? Because this is important within that tradition. Now, within another community's tradition, they might have more singing and dancing and different ways of engaging in the sadhana. Why you should follow the tradition you begin. Like obviously there's some people that will be the exceptions that are more inclined towards this and towards that. But I think the texts give you the flexibility there to do those things. Like someone like Vidura coming out of the tradition of being a sutta too, going towards that, towards Atmajnana versus, someone like Radhe or Karna or whatever it was, in that tradition, right? So you find these demarcations, I think, are much more nuanced and flexible than we think they were. And the purpose of these traditions seem to be much more pointed in the text, and we think there are general rules for everyone. But that's not. This is Samanya Dharma. Samanya Dharma is for everybody. But this is like Kula Dharma. It's just like if your family is musicians, why do you need to go learn Vedic texts? Why do you need to learn ritualistic texts?
Absolutely. Now, even here, when the issue of Varna and identity comes, because every Vishesha Dharma is for a specific section of people.
Yeah.
So the question of, if I can change my Varna to this Varna or that Varna, that also comes forward.
Yeah.
Because Varna by birth is a very taboo kind of a thing. Oh, it should not happen or whatever. I have again referred to a lot of texts and posted on my Medium page about that.
I'll link everyone with this.
Putting into perspective.
Yeah.
So the point is, we know that the identity is false. Me calling myself a Brahmana,
yes,
is technically, from a point of view of the fundamental reality, it is false.
Sure.
We know that. Because Atma has no attribute.
Yes. Has no gender, nothing. Yeah.
Yeah. So why then are we following it? The point is, in our tradition, Dharma has a certain side of surrendering, a paratantrata. Why? Because you have this identity that you have got. You did not choose. I did not choose to be born in this family. No. You did not choose to be born into that family. None of us chooses. Someone may have this ability to choose, but we don't have.
Right.
So I've got into this identity. I've been given these certain rules to be followed in my kula.
Right.
Then I surrender to them. I try to follow them. But now if I try to change my identity, like one false identity to another false identity, then I become uncomfortable with that, with the second false identity, and then I try to find another false identity. While moving through various false identities, there is no end. You do not get towards the prime goal of our tradition, which is Parama Purushartha, which is moksha.
Yeah.
For moksha, you need to reach vairagya at some point. Now, how does vairagya come? Through paratantrata. You have an identity which has been given to you, which has been some may think that it has been forced on them. So now you have that. You have your kula dharmas, you have your rules and regulations, you have your traditions. You have to follow them, and while following them, while performing your duties, with the feeling that they're duties, you do not want them, you do not want to perform them, but you are performing them because they're duties. Slowly and slowly, you start to become a little detached from the whole system, because you do not find peace in that, you do not find pleasure in that, which is the point of the whole ritual system. at one point you stop feeling good about it. You only perform it as your duty. And there you become detached.
Interesting.
And when you become detached, when the Vairagya kicks in, then you start to have the desire to know the truth of things. You desire to know where I would end after doing this.
Sure.
The jijnasa, the Brahma jijnasa or the Dharma jijnasa,
Sure.
every jijnasa, every kind of jijnasa then enters into the picture.
Well, I guess that's why it makes sense. It says, Brahma Sutras, Ato Brahma Jijnasa, right? Come after this, after what is the Dharma Kanda, after the ritualistic portion,
And
the knowledge.
it could be in the previous birth also.
Yeah. So
Like
here's my question to you then. Then what's the difference between Varna and Jati?
Tricky, but I would answer it in two levels. First, the usage of the words. When I see in the Manu Smriti, the jati technically means birth.
Yeah.
So a Brahman jati person, or the person who is Brahman by jati, belongs to the Brahman Varna. Okay. By jati means by birth.
Yeah.
But the usage of the jati word I've read mostly with regards to the offspring of the mixed Varna marriages. Okay. Pratiloma jati, Anuloma jati, and all that. The Varna is only restricted to the four Varnas: Brahman, Kshatriya, Vaishya, and Shudra.
Right.
The jatis are born from the mixtures of these.
Right.
But again, in the Manu Smriti itself, the usage of Varna is extended. The usage is extended, and even the commentators sometimes use the word Varna for Chandal, for example, for Pulkasa, and for other jatis which are born from the mixed Varna marriages. So mostly the Varnas are only four, which Manu has specified elsewhere also. Nasti Panchama, with this statement, there is no fifth Varna. And that is why most Anuloma and Pratiloma jatis are combined in this one single Varna called Shudra.
Yeah.
For which you see an example in the Ashtadhyayi also, and its commentary by Patanjali, the Mahabhashya. At one point, they combine all the Shudras. There are the Shudras who perform the Pancha Mahayajnas, and there are Shudras who do not perform. They have other, like the Chandalas and all other people. So many jatis are combined together in the Shudra Varna. There are pure Shudras, and then there are these jatis, which are born of the mixed Varna marriages. But mostly, the usage is confusing at points. I actually put up a question about this, that the Varna word has been used in a secondary sense for jatis as well. Yeah. So, but the rule is there are four Varnas and there are many jatis.
But it's interesting because, like, to map on the Varnas to jatis is almost impossible. At least on the extremes, sure. At the extremes, maybe. But everything in between it's a mess, right?
Absolutely.
Like some Patels belong to some Varna, other Varnas. It's all over the place,
Because of the apat kalas that have come in between at times and in various reasons. Because in the apat dharmas there is a rule that if you follow the apat dharmas even after the apat kal is over, the time of distress is over, in a certain amount of generations, you will your offspring will become that Varna.
Interesting.
So the gotras would follow, everything else would follow, but in that very family, the Varna would change. In that sense. So,
and this is where I feel like in this day and age, if people are still traditionally doing this, I mean, how would you group people that get married outside of the Indian people, right? I'm married to a white woman. What are my children? What are they? I mean, those are the questions where I feel like it's getting interesting, because you had to have that in some sense when you went to Southeast Asia, right? Went to Thailand, Cambodia. We brought that system there, but it became very different.
Yeah, the thing is mostly how we distinguish between the Aryas and the Mlechas is that Aryas are those who follow the Varnashrama system traditionally, and Mlechas is basically a term who do not follow the Varnashrama system generally. But as we have seen from examples, Southeast Asia, for example, that Varnashrama system has traveled there. You have Brahmanas there, for example, with certain Gotras also.
Yeah.
So it has traveled for all practical purposes, and they are performing those rituals also. All those dharmas that have been given to them. And the very traditional, very strict scholars may say, oh, this is like technically that would not be the case, that the Varna of the father would travel down to the children.
Right.
Because when there is a lot of distance, like the Brahman father and the Shudra mother, for example, there's a distance of Varnas. There's a distance of Varnas, and the child would get the Varna of the mother. For example, the case of Vidur.
Yeah.
The father is Veda Vyasa and the mother is a Dasi, and he got the Shudra Varna for himself, although he excelled a lot in that. So the traditional view is this. And the traditional view, I would say, it is on a metaphysical and ritual level. As the idea of Nitin Sridhar, that Varnas are ritual states.
Sure.
Because they are connected specifically to certain rituals, because it is only when certain rituals are completed, even in the Aryas, even within the Aryas, if you do not follow those rituals and the marriage happens in the same Varna, the Varna may not travel to the children.
Interesting. I mean, that's
so again, it is a very strict point. It is a very strict point. And again, how Medhatithi answers that in, I guess, the 5th verse of the 10th chapter. He's asked this point, that who is the Brahman? He says, oh, a Brahmani mother and a Brahman father, the offspring is a Brahmana. And how do you know that the parents are Brahmanas? Oh, again, the same definition. And again, the same definition, infinite regression.
Sure.
Okay. So he answers that, see, the jatis in the sense of Varnas also, are known through memory, through collective memory of the people. So if in my family, we did not ever sit together and say that, oh, we are Brahmanas, and I've never heard that happen.
Yeah.
Only during rituals, it is said that, oh, when we do sankalpas, what is your gotra? This is your gotra. What is the Varna? This is Varna. On that occasions, I heard this happen. So in that sense, the collective memory of a people is important. If they think that, oh, we have consistently thought of ourselves as this, in case of Southeast Asia, for example, the Brahmanas there have known themselves as Brahmanas. So collective memory is also praman, because you cannot go back and check if it was actually what you think it was.
Because there's no Brahmana gene, so to speak.
Exactly. And you should read the case of the rishi called Asita Devala. Buddha mentioned the case of Asita Devala, that he actually questioned some rishis regarding their ancestry. Okay. So do you know yourself? And we have these even in case of the Nahush and Yudhishthir Samvad. You have a certain verse that Yudhishthir mentions there, where the Brahmanas think that, are we really Brahmanas? Which actually shows their humble nature, that they were not into pride, but they were following the Kula Dharma as taking them as their duties and not their pleasure.
Right. It's very interesting. I mean, we could keep talking about this. I mean, I think it's a fascinating subject. For me, Varna and Jati don't really matter much in the real world anymore. So it's not something I take, except for my own personal practices, right? And I don't involve myself in anyone else's world. Nor do I think in this world that it makes sense to really gatekeep. If you want to learn the Vedas are there. If you want to learn the Puranas are there.
It has been said in the Puranas also now about the Kali Yuga. Everybody will read the Vedas, become experts.
Will
do pravachanas on Vedas. You can say it was pre-decided that it would happen.
That's right.
Yeah.
So no, but I mean, this is really, really fascinating, Satyan. I really appreciate your time. I know I've taken about like 2 hours and change. Would love to have you back on some other point and talk more about other subjects. But do you have any last minute thoughts or ideas that you want to discuss or bring up?
Just that follow Samanya Dharma. First of all, definitely. and take Bhakti seriously. That's it.
Yeah. No,
It's
I
a very important thing. It is the purest form of yoga. And do not underestimate the power of chanting names and remembering God.
yeah, no, absolutely. I think those are Samanya Dharma is very important, right? In the Gita chapter, he says ahimsa, satyam, krodha, tyaga, shanti, these 26 qualities he gives, for
Yep.
Deva Sampati, right? Which I think is brilliant. It's beautiful, right? And one of the most important ones is also, compassion towards all beings and showing love to everyone and everything. But yes, I agree with you. So thank you, Dr. Satyan Sharma, for joining us. And I'll put all your information for your Medium and your Twitter on the link so that people can follow you. And I think is that the best way to contact you if someone wants to contact you?
Yeah, my email ID would be good for that.
Okay.
In case somebody wants to have a serious conversation or some query.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I'll put that up there too. So thank you. Are you working on anything now that you want people to know about? Are you working on any books or any projects?
For this time, for a while now, I'm planning to publish my thesis in a book style. It would happen in a year or two. I'm working on I'm improving on the work I've done.
Sure.
So it'll take some time, and I would be working on some manuscripts now. Because that's what I want to do. I want to publish some texts, unpublished ones, which are important to understand the missing links in the Darshanic tradition.
Oh, that'd be fantastic. No, absolutely.
Yeah,
Keep me posted. Keep me posted on those, and then we'll have you back on.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
All right, everyone. We'll see you next time. Thank you.
Pushpa sugarda sumalaya samire Pavana munijana yamuna tire Pavana munijana yamuna tire Gayati vanamali Gayati vanamali maduram Gayati vanamali